And I think I'm live now. Okay, start over. My name is Deena Barselah. I am an integrative and holistic health coach. I have worked with families for over a decade. I've supported myself in my own holistic health needs from chronic health conditions growing up as a kid and into my adulthood. I've supported families around the world in all different areas of integrative health. And over the years, there's been different areas of focus. But now I am really just supporting mothers and supporting families in coming into a more joyful, more confident, more engaged, just wonderful relationship with food for yourself and for your whole family. And I'll just share a little bit about my background. And if you see me look down, I have a couple notes here just so I don't forget to tell you some really important things. But I grew up in Philadelphia. I live in California now. I live in Southern California. But I grew up in Philadelphia in a very mainstream health home. I grew up with a single mom, and it was myself and my older brother. And my mother and every woman I knew, so my grandmother, my aunts, my mom's cousins, my friends' mothers, all the women I knew were either on a diet or off a diet and talking about needing to go back on a diet. So I'm now 41. I grew up in the 80s and the 90s, and that was the conversation. And I would love to know if that resonates, if that's something that you experience as well. I'm realizing right now that I actually can't see comments. So I want to make sure that comes through. I'm not sure how to do that. Okay. So that was the conversation. That was the tone and the feeling around food when I was growing up. As it related to health, everything was very, like I said, mainstream, conventional. So if I had something going on, went to a doctor, I was often put on antibiotics or some sort of medication. There was not really any conversation around listening to the body, trusting the body, understanding what was going on in the body. And it wasn't like a gentle conversation. And I believe now, reflecting on that and having worked with so many families, that a lot of this is driven by the diet world, the diet culture. We're kind of indoctrinated into like, this is how you eat. This is the diet du jour, growing up in the 80s and the 90s into the 2000s, there's always been a different diet, a different cleanse, a different protocol. And, here we are now. And I believe that most of us are inundated with much more of what I consider to be wellness culture versus diet culture, although there's a lot of overlap between those. And we are often feeling like we need to catch up. We need to get on the next right thing. We need to do the right thing for our children when it comes to food. What cleanse is, your friend starting? What should you be doing? How are you, this constant striving to optimize what we eat. And I'm going to get into that more because I believe we're getting at the wrong question there. So I'm curious if you grew up with a lot of kind of fear around food, if the conversation around food was similar to what I described, if you felt kind of detached from understanding your relationship with food, like how a certain craving or something that you wanted to eat would feel in your body. That's how it was for me. And, I also am very highly sensitive. I feel things really strongly. In the family that I grew up with, there wasn't all that much room for that. So I come from a lineage of women that really did a lot of holding their emotions, kind of stuffing down their emotions, and didn't really have productive ways of expressing their needs and expressing their emotions. So I learned that, not explicitly stated, but I learned that. And a tool that I went towards was controlling food. And that became an eating disorder for me in my teens and into my 20s. And this is not uncommon, whether it's what you might consider to be a full-blown eating disorder. For me, that was bulimia, restricting food, binging, purging. For others, that may look like a disordered eating pattern of eating beyond levels of fullness, restricting food, going on and off diets, dietary protocols constantly in the mix, right? That diet cycle, as we call it. And because of several different factors, that was something that I learned to control. And that stayed with me, like I said, into my 20s and even into my 30s. When things started to really shift, I would say, is when I became a mom. It was already shifting. I was already a holistic health coach. I was already learning. I was steeped a lot in the wellness world, but I could tell that I was still controlling a lot of things around food because of this protocol or this podcast or this recommendation and this health practitioner tells me something. And when I became a mom at age 35, I now have an almost 7-year-old son. I realized oh, wow, this expectation and assumptions and food rules and all of these food shoulds don't go anywhere for me, right? I was still holding a lot of those things. And then I was responsible for feeding a child. And regardless of whether you breastfeed or you bottle feed, the shoulds and the rules and the expectations start around food from day one, right? They come in really early. And we are inundated. The pediatrician says this, the lactation consultant says this, the nutritionist says this, and it comes from all these directions. And then it goes into first foods for our children, and then it goes into how do I nourish my toddler, and then what I always hear, always was true for me, is that the child that had a really broad and expansive diet then suddenly became a picky eater. And then we get into the picky eater conversation, and it's, it just keeps going. So you carry your own stuff from your own relationship with food. And then here you are managing this for a family. And in comes the feeling of that food feels like a chore because it feels like something to manage. It feels like work. It feels like, okay, I've been managing this thing, this burden, this my relationship with food, perhaps a tumultuous relationship with food for your whole life. And now here you are, and you have to manage it for your children and maybe for a partner and other people that live in your home. And so that is at the core of what I want to get into a little bit more today, because something else that was a big part of my story is that my mother passed away in 2018. And as I shared, growing up, my mom had a very tumultuous relationship with food. And it is clear to me that she took this tumultuous relationship with food, these struggles, these rules, these wishes for something that wasn't there around her body and food to her grave. She experienced it until the day she died when she was 67 years old. And that is not something I wanted for me. It is not something I want for you. It is not something I want for anybody out there. And that takes being able to change the story. So I had already been a health coach for almost a decade when my mom died. And like I said before, I was really steeped in the wellness world. And the wellness world is filled with just other dogma, right? It's not exactly the same as the diet conversation around calories and fat grams and this and that, but the wellness world is filled with all of these other shoulds. And it became really clear to me that I wanted to be able to pull back and have clarity to cultivate a relationship and a language and a context around how do we do food in my family and how can I support other families? Because what wasn't working is drilling down over and over again into the what. The what is, what should I feed for dinner? What should I put on my plate? What should I eat for breakfast? What should I feed my kid? What should I pack in a lunch? What snack should I give, right? It's the what over and over again. And we're so focused on the what because as a culture, we are often, and this is promoted by social media memes and quick graphics and wanting those quick tips, right? We're focused on the product. We're focused on the solution. We're focused on what is the fix? What is the thing that I need, right? And there's this illusion that if you just get the right infographic and the right Instagram reel or whatever it might be that tells you exactly what your kid should eat in order to be healthy or what you should put on the table for dinner, then everything will be resolved. Excuse me, I have an itch on my nose that won't go away. And that is an illusion. It's the same illusion that happens with the diet world, that happens with what should I do to lose weight? What should I eat to have glowing skin? Whatever it might be, we get into the same thing with food for our families. And the the truth is that we need to be able to pull back and look at the how, look at the context, look at what is it that we are even trying to do in our homes. And part of that is understanding where you come from, where this relationship, where you were and where you are today in that relationship with food. And that's what I often refer to as the food rules, the food shoulds, and the food story. So I shared just a bit about my food story, and you have a food story. We all have a food story. Some of that is influenced by your home of origin. Some of that, and this is the rules and the shoulds. This is where we have to unpack a little bit, right? It doesn't really make sense to dive right into what should I make for dinner that my kid will eat, because these are all the problems. We have to pull back and we have to understand where we came from and where we're trying to go. So, what influences food story, food rules, food shoulds, right? Someone like me, I'm a health coach. I get on Instagram and I talk about my philosophy and what I recommend, right? There's a ton of other people out there that do that. It could be a blog post. It could be an Instagram post. It could be an infographic you see on Pinterest. It can be your pediatrician. It can be a friend at the playground. It can just be another mom. It can be an assumption you're making about how something is going in some other family, right? It can be still your parents. You're an adult, but it can be your mother, your father, your parents. That there's so much in that sphere of influence. And what we need to do before we can get to the what, before we can try to find a solution, is we need to ask, is this true about all of these different rules? Is this true for me now? Is this true for my child, right? You know your child best. You know the unique needs of your child. Is this true for the rhythm of your family? So we are a homeschooling, very unschooling family. So we personally in my home, we're not confined by breakfast has to be at exactly a certain time because we need to get out the door for school drop off. And that's not part of my life. But if that's part of your life, then you're going to be asking different questions. And so this is why those memes and those graphics and those lists of things to do often don't work. Like you just spin your wheels over and over again, the same way that maybe you have in the past, like I have with diet after diet after diet, because we spin our wheels because it doesn't apply to us. And eventually it gets old. Eventually we realize that we're pushing a boulder up a hill following someone else's rules, and they don't apply to us in the unique season of life that we are in. So we scrap it. And then what happens when we scrap it? We feel like a failure. We feel like, oh, I can't do that. Or, it's my kid. My kid is a picky eater. My kid won't eat those things. When we pull back and we look at the how, what we start to look at is the environment. We look at the space. We look at the actual, what is your food planning rhythm? How does that work? Is that working for you? Where can that shift? We look at your family's unique dynamic and schedule. And this is what gets to the core of having a positive, embodied, confident, and joyful relationship with anything in life. And what I want you to understand is that food is not different. It's just that we've been putting food in this box of work and chore and something to manage. But if we can pull back and we can look at, okay, how can I engage with food the way I might engage with other things in life that, we have bigger goals about? If we're constantly drilling down over and over again into the fix and into the solution, we're so focused on the what. And like I said, for some reason, diet culture influences this. There's many influences, but we put food in a different category than we might other things that we engage with in life. So a question I often get is, how do I get my kid to eat more vegetables? This might be a question you have as well. How do I get my kid to eat more vegetables? My kid's a picky eater. My kid doesn't like to eat vegetables. They're not eating any vegetables. The underlying fear there is that your child is not going to grow up to be healthy and thriving, that they're going to choose unhealthy foods, that they're going to be an unhealthy person, right? If we really dig into those fears, and I recommend that you do, because it's good to get clear on what's going on there so that you're not just, by default saying like, eat your vegetables, right? You want to understand, okay, where's this coming from? So when we get clear on those fears, what we then do is the flip side of that is we ask ourselves, so what am I trying to really cultivate here? What is the tone? What am I trying, what do I want my child to really believe and trust and know about food and about their bodies, right? Because if we're talking about food, we're often talking about the body because we're talking about health. We're talking about good digestion. We're talking about all these things. So when 9 times out of 10, when I'm working with clients and we get into this work, I ask, what do you want for your daughter, right? Like, let's say there's a specific struggle, a specific concern with a certain child. What do you want her to believe about her body? What do you want her to trust? What do you want her to know? Like, she just knows this as truth. And again, 9 times out of 10, what comes up are things like, I want my child to trust their body. I want my child to be able to listen to signals and clues and symptoms that come from the body and be able to take care of their bodies. I want them to know what food feels good and what food doesn't feel good, right? When my clients answer those questions, what ends up happening is they naturally pull back. They naturally are like, okay, big picture, what do I really want my kid to believe about their body? And I want you to do the same thing for yourself, right? So often as mothers, we get boxed in to focusing on the thing for our child, for our children, right? And it's too much pressure, right? It is just a pressure cooker. It's too much pressure. We're working too hard to just control all of these things around food. And when we're able to take that step back and understand, well, what am I really trying to cultivate here? What then happens is you can start to understand that what you're doing is you're creating an invitation. You're not putting the exact food on the plate and then giving it to the child and saying, eat this, right? Or else, eat this or you don't have this other opportunity. Eat this or there will be no dessert. Or I worked so hard on this meal and then my child doesn't eat it and that feels so bad, right? I'm so sorry. I don't know what's going on with my itchy nose. I'm apparently having some allergies, but so when we can create an invitation around food, what we're able to do is we just naturally can release the pressure. When you're creating invitation, that means you're bringing things into the home that you feel good about in collaboration with your children. And this is work that I do in all the programs I run and all the client work that I do. We come up with a specific way that supports your family. The personalities in your family, the food tendencies, the rhythms, the food behaviors in your family. And we work with those to come up with ways that you can release some pressure for yourself, that you can have greater peace of mind, that you can reduce that worry and figure out, how do I create the invitation for food? So then what that becomes, if we go back to that same question around, how do I get my kid to eat more vegetables? When we take that step back and we look at it as an invitation, we realize that, okay, once again, food is something that we engage with. We engage with food in the world like we engage with many other things. Food happens to be something that you can't really do without, right? We need food for survival, and we engage with it multiple times a day. And, therein, once again, lies why food can feel like so much of a chore, because it feels relentless. It feels like you're constantly giving and doing when it comes to food, okay? So what we turn that question of how do I get my kid to eat more vegetables into is, where in the world, in the child's day, in life in general, do they experience vegetables? Do they interact with vegetables? That may be the actual carrot, the actual vegetable, but it might be on a farm. It might be, we have this amazing sprouting tray. I can link it in the comments. It's a company called Hamama, and it's these microgreen sprouts that we get them by mail. It's a subscription, and they're just fantastic, really nutritive, really supportive. And we unpack it. My son does this all the time. He unpacks the sprouts, he puts the water in, he lays it in the tray, right? So there's vegetables on the counter just naturally happening. There's always vegetables or fruit in a bowl on the counter. You might be growing something in your backyard. You may go to a farm. You may be reading about vegetables and how they grow in a book. This is where you also get to know the different personalities, and we work with this. And well, how does your child engage with the world in general, right? What gets them excited? What are they passionate about? What are they? How do they get curious? Are they someone that likes to observe something in a couple different ways before they engage with it? Do they like to try things in different ways? Are they one of the? Do you have a kid like mine that likes to engage with the world in a very real life way? So my child, from a very early age, like toddler age, always wanted to do like the real life thing. He didn't want to do the play version of the thing. He wanted to do the real life thing. So he wants to engage with all the tools and the appliances and the pots and the pans and the knives in the kitchen. He needs to do that. That's how he wants to engage with his world. So for me, I know that bringing him into the mix when I'm preparing food is really important, and finding ways that he gets to be himself and he gets to, it's play really for him. It's the way he's experiencing the world, but how can he do that in a way that feels really good to him? How do you create the invitation around it, right? Are you just putting food out, or is it just like it's specifically at mealtime? Are you aware of when your child and your children are naturally hungry, right? These are all the questions that we dig into. And paramount here, crucial in this formula, is how you engage with vegetables in this example. How, when, and how do your children, does your child see you make a beautiful plate of something that includes vegetables and take a moment to like maybe sprinkle some herbs on top, or take some pumpkin seeds or something out of the cabinet and add some layers, add some visual appeal? Are you making your food beautiful? Or, because food feels like such a chore, is food often like a grab and go situation? Does food feel like an interruption for you? If food feels like an interruption, then that is something that our kids are going to feel, right? We tend to remember much more of a feeling than the specific what. Now, there's certain words or certain phrases or certain things that we always think back to, that we always remember that our parents said. But more so, and I'm sure that you'll find this true as you are digging into your own food story and unpacking a little bit of those food assumptions, those food rules, those food shoulds, it's a feeling. So for me, reflecting back, part of my food story is that the feeling around food was that it was something to manage. The feeling around food was that it was stressful. The feeling around food was that at any moment, I could eat something, and this was the kind of the feeling I got from people around me. I could eat something and I would just gain 10 pounds, like out of nowhere, right? For me, the thing growing up was around weight, around diet, right? So that's where there was a feeling that my body would just betray me because things would just come out of nowhere. And if I didn't adhere to something in such an unbelievably strict way, then the whole thing would fall apart. Then it's just off the rails. The diet is over. I'm a failure. I didn't do well. And now I don't have the willpower. I don't have the stamina to stick to something, right? These are the feelings that come in. And so if the feeling around food is that there's no time for it, if the feeling around food is that it's rushed, if the feeling around food is that it's just this burden and it's a heavy load to bear all the time, then that will be felt. And that is what I want to help you be able to break down and understand, okay, what is my real role here? How can I have more joy in food? How can I take a moment to plate something beautiful and know that that is a priority for me, that is a priority for my body, that is a priority for my wellness? And almost all the time, I get this in my Instagram messages, over email, every client messages this to me. I took some time to plate something beautiful for me. And what do you know? A child comes in and they say, Mama, that looks beautiful. Or I want something like that. How can I make that? And you start to see that spark, that delight, that joy in food really come through. So, as I said, food is just one thing we engage with. But at the same time, something that I feel very strongly about is that food is a gateway. Food is a portal to so much in life, and it's an opportunity because specifically food is something that you engage with multiple times and you need to engage with it multiple times a day, because that's the case, you have an opportunity to peel back those layers and understand, okay, what about this is stressful for me? What's the breakdown here? Where was there just like no buffer in my day to be able to actually put together a meal? How does food even come into the home? Who's responsible for food shopping? Are you just on a whim, always just going to a store to pick something up? Or is there a system that your nervous system can rest into so that you're able to receive the delight and the nourishment from food? I'll close with, something else that I think, excuse me as I blow my nose again. Something else that I think is a very prominent thing that we experience around food these days is it under, the umbrella of these food rules and shoulds, is the language we use around food. The language we use is often very moralistic. It's very good, bad, right, wrong, healthy, unhealthy, real food, junk food. And I want to encourage you to pull back from using those words and use words that are more descriptive. So when I'm talking about food with my son, I will say that something is more nutrient dense. And we talk about nutrients. We talk about what's in food. Foods that have more vitamin C. Foods that have, certain fat that's really supportive for the brain. Don't shy away from using the real language around food that your children can understand and your children can feel safe and trust, because what often happens is these double standards sneak in, right? And that gets confusing for children. Side note, or spoiler alert, right? Though that language is confusing for you as an adult as well. That language is really hard for the body to understand. If something is healthy at one point, but not healthy at another point, right? If ice cream there's certain times when we eat ice cream, but then there's certain times we don't eat ice cream. What makes certain times eating ice cream okay? And how do you know that ice cream can be okay for you, or it's not okay for you, or it's good for you, or it's not good for you, right? So the way I will talk about this is we will break down. For my son, for example, when he eats ice cream, dairy ice cream, he gets constipated. He gets constipated when he eats dairy. So we link it directly to a real life experience of something that his body can know. Because going back, if we ask ourselves, what do we want our children to know about their bodies and about food? We need to be using that language now. We also talk about blood sugar in my home. And again, you're not going to do this with a 2-year-old, but we can do this a lot earlier than we think that we can. And when you talk about blood sugar, when you talk about sugary foods, right? We model that we're not eating sugary foods often, right? There's no hard and fast rules here, but around like on an empty stomach. Because what happens if we eat sugar and we haven't had some protein or some fiber or some fat that's going to mitigate that sugar spike? So that sugar spike goes up, and we talk about that. I kind of acted out with my son on what it feels like to have really high blood sugar or really low blood sugar. And we act that out. So we want to steer away from using those buzzwords. And we want to rest into the how of food, because it's the how around it that takes away the chore. Something feels laborious if we can't, constantly laborious, if we can't lean into the process and we're so focused on the product. The product is the meal. The product is what did the child eat, right? It's like this running scorecard around, okay, that was a good eating thing because he ate all the healthy foods that I packed, right? We need to lean into it's an invitation, and we are cultivating this over many, many, many food experiences, many meals, and you always have the opportunity to notice, to tune in to what's going on with people in your family, and to notice what's happening inside you. That is what will cultivate a strong relationship with the body. And we have to also be able to release attachment, right? We cannot control what someone physically takes and puts into their bodies. We cannot control what somebody else does with their bodies. But we can create an invitation where something may feel inviting and possible and observe the different ways in which someone engages with the world. And food being one of those things. So I have a couple invitations for you. The first is that you can go to my website, and I will also link it here. I created something called the snack hack because I know that one of the biggest areas of stress for us is around snacks. And it's constantly being like, Mama, can I have a snack? Do you have a snack for me? What's for a snack, right? As soon as we feel like we've rounded out a meal, there's a child coming in asking for a snack. And so the snack hack is a way that you create an invitation where there's a positive connection to food, where we really use our senses with the food, where everything is in clear containers. We connect with our eyes, we take an actual cup or a bowl rather than taking a handful and walking in another direction. You do this, your partner, if you have a partner, does this, the children do this, and we come into a really positive and embodied relationship with snacks. And snacks are a great way to segue into other areas of food. So it's a whole protocol. It's a really fantastic roadmap for your family. And you can get that on my website, and I'll link it here. It's a free guide for you called the Snack Hack. And then my other invitation for you is that this week I am launching my next version of a workshop that I've run in the past called the Joyful Family Meal, where I walk through how do you optimize the space and the environment? How do you optimize planning? How do you optimize the meal? All these things that I just introduced you to, how do you actually bring that into your home? And I share real tools and language and resources. There's an entire little workbook that goes along with it. Some of the guiding questions that I put that I've shared here, and going deeper into it so that you can really come into a joyful family mealtime, and we can really start to strip away the chore element of it all. So if you have any questions, please put them here and I will answer them in the comments. For some reason, I can't see them. I'm not sure why. I don't know if there have been any questions that have come in during the video, but I promise I will stay in the comment thread here and happy to answer any of them. And please be in touch if you want to know more. I do all a free 20 to 30 minute consultation where we really can get into some of the meat, some of what's going on in your family and where you feel like you may need support, perhaps in your relationship with food, in your children's relationship with food, and taking that holistic view. So I hope this was all really supportive for you. I hope you're feeling a little bit of peace of mind, some direction in where you can go in supporting this for your family, and trust that this is a long game. This is not something that you need to do overnight. This is not something that you're just going to change on Monday. This is a relationship. We have a